start in 5 minutes. If you would like to participate in today's discussion, call 317-670-OOIDA. If you have already dialed in, please stay on the line. Live from Exit 24 will start in 4 minutes. Please stay with us. If you'd like to participate, call 317-676-6432. Live from Exit 24 will start in 3 minutes. Call us at 317-6700-OOIDA to join in the live discussion. Live from Exit 24 will start in 2 minutes. Please hang in there. If you'd like to ask a question, call 317-676-6432. OOIDA's Live from Exit 24 will start in 1 minute. Please stand by or call us at 317-676-6432 to join us.
Welcome, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Exit 24 is brought to you by the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. I'm Norita Taylor, your call screener today. Your host and special guest will join the show shortly. But for now, know that you can take part in today's show by calling with your questions or comments about the topic of discussion, which we'll introduce at the top of the show. The number to call is 317-67-OOIDA. That's 317-676-6432. And now I'll turn it over to your host.
Hey, thank you, Narita, and a big thank you to everyone that has been tuning in lately and asking a lot of great questions. The show continues to grow a little bit, and that's a good thing. So, welcome back to our next episode of Live from Exit 24. This show exists for drivers, and it's a platform for us to share information, get feedback from folks out on the road, and keep an open line of communication. So, the number to call in is 317-676-6432. Again, that's 317-67-OOIDA. The lines are open and we'll get to as many questions as we can. And if you're watching or listening on YouTube, you can post a question there and we'll try to answer it as well. Okay, enough with the announcements. Let's get on with the show. Joining us from the Reason Foundation is Robert Poole. He is the Director of Transportation Policy and covers all kinds of transportation-related issues. I hope you'll check out their website, which is reason.org. You'll find information regarding their perspective about commercializing rest areas, tolling, and if we have time, maybe get into highway funding. So they have, Mr. Poole covers a lot of topics on there. So check out the website, check out his page. And we also have Todd Spencer, President and CEO of OOIDA. He's going to give his perspective on these issues, and I think there's going to be some common ground, and what I'll say is maybe some not so common ground, but we will see. With that, guys, Todd, welcome to the program.
Hey, glad to be part of the show, Mike, and glad to be here with Bob Poole as well. I've listened to him and read his comments through the years and always find them interesting.
And Bob, welcome. Thanks for being on the show. Hopefully you can hear me unless I mess this up again somehow.
No, I'm right here, Mike. Thank you very much, and thanks, Todd, for the kind comments. I have followed your organization for many years, and only recently learned that you folks favor commercializing interstate rest areas, which was a pleasant surprise. I always like finding common ground with people that have important policy issues to deal with, and so I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Absolutely. Common ground is a good thing. And Bob, let's kind of get into it. But before we get into the issues, is there any more background that you want to provide on yourself or the Reason Foundation, kind of what you do there, how long you've been?
Okay, sure. Thanks very much. Reason Foundation is a nonprofit public policy think tank that was founded in 1978. I was the founding CEO and ran it for a number of years, but I've always been very interested in public policy, transportation policy. My background is engineering from MIT, and since 2000, when I stepped down as president, I've been doing transportation policy full-time rather than part-time. It includes air transportation, air traffic control, even a little bit of aviation security. So it's a broad portfolio. I have 3 colleagues on the transportation team, and Reason Foundation has a large number of other policy areas besides transportation. I also wrote a book. Well, I've written and edited several books, but my most recent book came out in 2018 called Rethinking America's Highways, which looks at the future of highways in the 21st century and suggests we need better ways of funding, managing, and operating them. And it was published by the University of Chicago Press, and the paperback edition just came out in January.
You know, that's an impressive history. I've been familiar with the Reason Foundation and some of the policy papers that you've put out over the years. I know we've never spoke before, but at least before the last couple of weeks. But certainly, a lot of people in D.C. know who you are, know what kind of work you do, and let's kind of get after it, I guess. And on the policy briefs that you mentioned, the one that I was looking at recently, it was titled "Rethinking Interstate Rest Areas." It's kind of relatively short, but packed with a ton of information. And I want to focus on that first, and I think it's important to kind of get some historical background. And as a lot of people know, there's a ban on commercializing rest areas, and kind of the way I explain it is you can't put a McDonald's or a gas station or really any other commercial service at an interstate rest area. What's the history on that? I mean, how far back does this go?
I did a lot of history on this in writing my book. This dates back to the start of the interstate highway system. The legislation was passed in '56, which set up dedicated federal fuel taxes, gasoline and diesel, and a highway trust fund that had never existed before. And as the interstates started getting built, there was a lot of concern in small-town America. Historic Route 66, there were restaurants and motels and things. And those folks figured, oh my gosh, the U.S. highways go right through the center of town, but these interstates are going to bypass us, which they did. And so they lobbied their members of Congress to say, well, look, this is going to be this is going to bankrupt us. We need to be protected somehow. And so what Congress decided to do was to say, all right, unlike the turnpikes in the eastern part of the country, which have full commercial service plazas, we are going to make it illegal on the interstates that are developed with federal tax money to do that. But you guys are welcome to open up outlets at the exit ramps, and that was put into law in 1960, and it's still there in a federal statute that bans any kind of commercial activity other than vending machines, which are allowed, and they don't charge for the toilet. So you have restrooms and vending machines and some amount of parking, and that is it. And that is still the case. Every time the members of Congress or state DOTs have said, look, state DOTs don't have any dedicated funding source for rest areas. So they have tried several times to get bipartisan bills through Congress to allow commercial rest areas so they could have revenue stream to expand them, make them better. But it always gets defeated by the truck stop group, NATSO, which I'm sure everybody on this call probably knows. They represent not only truck stops, but a lot of the franchisees of the McDonald's and things that are near the off-ramps of interstates. And they are very powerful legislatively. They have gone on the warpath, basically. Each time there's a suggestion or a bill proposed in Congress, and of course they issued a big, nasty news release about the study when it came out last month. But I think we have a chance to. I think the tide may have turned enough that we might get a coalition that would include your organization of the owner-operators and possibly Women in Trucking, which I'm going to be on their radio program in a few weeks, and the whole large growing community of organizations that are concerned about vehicle electrification are really pushing hard on Congress and the Biden administration to allow electric vehicle charging at interstate rest areas. And that actually was in a House reauthorization bill that passed last year with, I think, only Democratic support. But it was the first time there'd been anything in Congress that would actually make an exception to the ban on any commercial. So, obviously you could give away electricity if you could get somebody to provide it for free. But otherwise, in any normal sense, electric charging is going to be a commercial service. And so it's per se illegal under the current law.
Well, that's some very interesting background and history on that. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to Todd. Any thoughts on what Bob just said, what OOIDA's position is on all of this and what it has been historically, I guess?
Well, the highways for truckers that's their workplace. And what we've observed through the years, the decades, is that improvements in those routes generally, the beneficiaries are many. Certainly, it lowers the costs of goods. Certainly, it lowers the cost of transportation of those goods simply because trucking and travel is easier and simpler. Having said that, to kind of cut to the chase, I'm a little long in the tooth now. I remember a whole lot of this stuff from being a kid and watching Interstate 70 and the other routes in the Kansas City area develop, and the method to the madness with how highways were laid out and planned. And of course, as Bob mentioned, the original design was to circumvent big urban areas, basically to
Right.
one, reduce congestion, and also to speed commerce. And prior to the interstates around here, we had a road that I grew up knowing its name was 71 Bypass. And the bypass was all about bypassing Independence and Kansas City. And of course, invariably, what happens with those roads and what's happened with the interstate highway system since is that while, in the events that they were to go around urban areas, the urban areas moved, they gravitated to them. And of course,
Exactly. So many of them became very important commuter routes.
oh, absolutely. And the interstate system totally changed how America worked in that, it gave rise to what some refer to as urban sprawl. When there's a route, and of course, it's kind of a life lesson in that throughout our history, people and commerce gravitates to transportation routes. I mean, originally it was water, and then railroads, and then once highways just changed everything because it totally opened up the whole country to virtually everything.
No, absolutely, Todd. The trucking industry as we know it today, would not be anywhere near the size and productivity that it is without the interstates. I mean, that's absolutely critical to this development.
Oh, absolutely, and of course, our freedoms or choices people have about where they will live and things like that are totally. I mean, they were made of. They are able to be made as they are now simply because of the reliability and the efficiency of transportation. And in terms of, if you're going to have any population center at all, you got to have trucks. And you got to have trucks because somebody's got to bring you what you need because you ain't going to be packing it up and down the mountain. And
Right.
Trucks always deliver. Having said that, they have needs, and the whole idea of why we're having this discussion is on commercializing rest areas or opening those up to commercialization is simply because of the long-standing chronic shortage of places for drivers to park.
Exactly.
And I also don't want to get lost. I don't want to get lost in this discussion in that it's only trucks, because actually, statistically, motorists, non-truckers, use rest areas in greater numbers than trucks do. They just
I'm
have.
not surprised.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't know that, Todd.
Oh yeah, they do. And the idea with rest areas to start with was about safety. It was about giving people, the ability to stop and take a break on long drives.
Sure.
And,
But you can't even buy a cup of coffee.
Oh, hey, that's certainly I've been in plenty. Soda machines that may or may not work, and
Right.
And but again, drivers, all drivers need them simply because now and then you need to stop and stretch your legs and take a break. So,
Well, and this is a good, we have about a minute before our first break. And Bob, when we come back, I want the first question is going to go to you. And I guess my comment or question on that is, going back in time a little bit again. And the policy brief that you put together makes a distinction between toll revenue financed interstates and fuel tax funded interstates. And quite honestly, it's not something that most people, myself included, have really thought about. It's certainly nothing I've looked at before. And my question for you when we come back from the break is, why do you separate the two? And I think it's important to kind of provide some clarity or some distinction on the difference between an interstate rest area and a travel plaza on a toll road. So when we come back, Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you. We can get into that. So again, the lines are open. The number to call in is 317-676-6432. We're with Bob Poole, the Director of Transportation Policy at the Reason Foundation, and Todd Spencer, President and CEO of OOIDA. We'll be back in 30 seconds. Stay tuned.
$45. It ain't what it used to be. Today, with OOIDA, it can be worth a whole lot more. A $45 membership helps you save with special pricing from top vendors on equipment, fuel, tires, services, and much more. Plus things the whole family can enjoy, like restaurants and travel. Save hundreds, even thousands. You can't afford not to be a member of OOIDA. Go to OOIDA.com. Your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Mike Matousek, and I'm your host of Live from Exit 24. Again, we're with Bob Poole with the Reason Foundation and Todd Spencer with OOIDA. And before we left for the break, Bob, I kind of was highlighting or providing some background on some of the other points that you made in your policy brief on interstate rest areas. And again, the one of the parts I found kind of fascinating was that you make a distinction between fuel tax funded interstates and what you might find at an interstate rest area versus a toll revenue financed travel plaza. And so I guess, can you provide any sort of,
Sure.
some additional background on that?
Sure. The first superhighway, limited access, with no traffic lights and so forth, was the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which the first section of it opened in 1940, just before World War II, and it wasn't finished until after World War II. But that inspired states, before the interstate plan was actually put into practice by Congress. You had all these states in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Ohio, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Indiana, all developed limited access toll roads financed by toll revenue bonds. They would sell the bonds based on a projection of traffic and revenue, and that would provide the capital up front to pay for the construction cost. And when the Congress finally got around in '56 to passing the Interstate Act, most of those toll roads were in places that made sense to be part of the interstate system. So Congress grandfathered them in, gave them interstate route numbers. Like Pennsylvania Turnpike is I-76, I think, and the Indiana Turnpike is I-80 and I-90. But said that, and they already had built full service plazas with with restaurants, takeout, fast food, gas stations, and so forth. And some even had some service station types besides just gas, and so those were grandfathered in when Congress passed the ban on commercial services in 1960. So the toll roads already had them and were allowed to keep them. And in fact, as I point out in the policy brief, in the last 5 years or so, many of the big eastern turnpikes have done a major refurbishing and expansion, including, in some cases, electric vehicle charging facilities. And they've done these, again, with long-term financing, similar to the way the toll roads themselves are financed. They have a competition. They find a professional company, the kinds that provide restaurants and bookstores and things in airport terminals, Host USA and companies like that. Win these 30 and 35-year contracts to finance through the bonds or other capital investment, the reconstruction and modernization and expansion of these service plazas, and then manage them, select the vendors through competitive bidding, and manage the services over the lifetime of the thing. So it's no cost to the turnpike per se, and it's probably a minor revenue source, a little percentage of the overall thing. And so I suggest in the policy brief that if Congress got rid of the prohibition for the interstate rest areas, that potential would be available. State DOTs don't have $500 million to turn a little piece of pavement with a restroom and vending machine into a full service plaza. But a public-private partnership like the turnpikes are using would be readily available to do that. So I think it's a lesson that could be applied to speed the development of the full service plazas if and when Congress gets rid of the ban.
Todd, as we just heard what Bob said, we're thinking about both of these models, kind of, interstate rest areas versus toll road service plazas. Is there a model that kind of sticks out to you that you think drivers would like better, or is there some kind of in between? I think, and I guess the question I'm really getting at is there's agreement on on the need for more parking, for example, for trucks. I guess how you actually fund it, right? If whether it be through some sort of toll road or something else. I mean, what do you think about what Bob just said, and the difference, I guess, between interstate rest areas and toll road service plazas?
Well, I can tell you that surveys of our members through the years have shown us over and over and over that they would prefer the privately owned truck stops. The reality is we haven't had enough of them for a long time. And realistically, we have fewer of them all of the time, given the economic realities that truck stop operators deal with, in that oftentimes their location is certainly prime for a whole lot of other economic interest to try to gobble up. And that certainly happens where there used to be truck stops. You look now and there's a distribution center, or sometimes there's a shopping center. There's all kinds of retail businesses. And of course, oftentimes truck stops aren't necessarily viewed by local communities as the ideal tenant.
The NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Right.
And, with basically, unfortunately, kind of this total disconnect from, wonder why these trucks would be here. Wonder how stuff gets on our shelves. So where we are, this is not a new issue. I mean, I last drove in the early 80s, and there weren't many places there weren't many rest areas or places to stop on the whole of the East Coast this long time ago. And all of the coast basically gets serviced virtually exclusively by trucks. And, kind of the rest, not only was that a long time ago, trucking has changed. I would imagine there are 3 times as many trucks on the road now as there were then. And again,
that's probably true.
Yeah, the need was there. So where we are is, look, shoot up here amongst us. One of us has got to have some relief. We got to have something, anything. And look, whatever we can get, that's what, I mean, that's an important enough
Something's
issue.
Better than nothing.
Absolutely. And, something I also learned a long time ago, and it's a reality, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And again,
Amen.
The need...
We learned that in engineering school, too.
The need for places for drivers to stop and park and refresh themselves is just simply growing. And our frustration on the part of lawmakers and policymakers to actually seriously address the capacity issue is just so frustrating. We're going to take what we can get. We have lots of other things we'd like to see happen too, but...
Hey, Bob, anything that you want to add to that? But we have, before we go to our first caller?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to suggest is that one of the candidates for doing the kind of service plazas on rest interstates could be NATSO itself, NATSO members themselves. I mean, some of these probably should be only for trucks, full-service truck stops right on the interstate. You need much more parking area for 18-wheelers than you do for cars. And you have specialized things like electric hookups for cabs, so you don't have to run the thing idle all night to have heat or air conditioning. Showers, sit-down meal service. There's all kinds of things that would make perfect sense for some of these commercial plazas to be truck-oriented or truck-exclusive. And who knows better than the truck stop companies? Just like the Host USA and those sorts of people knows best how to serve ordinary, regular motorists in their personal vehicles.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We're going to go to our first caller, and that is Daniel from Missouri. Daniel, if you can hear me, you are on the line with Bob Poole and Todd Spencer. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you guys doing this morning?
Great. Thank you.
I was listening in here, and I guess a couple of the questions I would have is I know that whenever they passed MAP 21, that within MAP 21 they were supposed to also have some funding that was supposed to be going towards the rest areas to increase for truck parking and the safety of the trucks due to the death of the driver who was killed there in the rest area. And that was one of their big pushes within that bill, is to assist and help truck drivers out. And yeah, here we are. It's been quite some time ago that MAP 21 was passed, and yet they're actually decreasing the amount of rest areas that we have out here on the road. I've seen a lot of rest areas where they've closed them up, and they've made it so you can't even get the trucks or anything into the rest area. They've tore the asphalt out or put barricades up. We've seen a lot of that over the years, and a lot of it is the states can't afford to fund them and keep the people there to keep the areas cleaned up, so that it's not a safety hazard if you do stop there.
Right, and there's no security either.
Right, yeah, and that's another thing. We've lost the security of it. So, I mean, me personally, I am for, bringing back these truck stops or bringing back the rest area, to help the truck driver, because a lot of times I don't like going into the truck stops. I mean, because, and let's face it, realistically, the truck stops are not called truck stops anymore. They're called travel plazas.
Right.
Because they want to focus on the traveling public. They don't want to focus on the trucks, but the truckers are the ones that are bringing the most revenue. I mean, I don't see a car pulling in and dropping, $700 in fuel,
No, and the car is not going to get off the interstate and drive around to find the truck stop. They want something. They're going to go no further than the off ramp if they have to do that. But they'd much rather stop and have a Starbucks and a bite to eat right at the rest area without having to search around in the dark in a strange place.
And another thing that we've had the issue with out here within the trucking community since MAP 21 is the increase in what we call the hot shot vehicles, which don't need a full parking spot like a semi, but yet they're taking up the full spots.
Right.
The ones pulling the campers, the ones that are pulling the flatbed trailers, doing the smaller work that to help alleviate some of the stress off the transportation industry. And, and I have no problem with the hot shot trucks and stuff, but we need to, that would be something that would be nice is if we could actually gear to where they had an area that they could park in without parking in the actual truck area.
Very good point.
Dan, thank you for calling in. I'm going to let Bob kind of answer that. I think we have about a minute and a half before our next break, and then let Todd get a word in as well. So, Dan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
The only thing that I know resulted from that MAP 21 provision was there's within Federal Highway Administration, they have a Jason's Law program that has been building an inventory of truck parking spaces around the country. And that's it as far as I don't think there's been anything else devoted to improving things.
Todd?
Daniel used the word maddening. That pretty well sums it up. And that, what he described is what drivers see absolutely every day. And it's sort of the economics of the issue. The Jason's Law effort has been as frustrating as it could be because the tragic demise of Jason is a dramatic example of just how crappy this situation is. But regrettably, all that legislation actually did was just, hey, let's take another look at the issue. And maddening describes that as well. And again, this is an issue that we've been bringing to the attention long before Jason. I remember the first time I won't necessarily say we, because a provision for commercializing rest areas was in a highway bill and got pulled out.
We are going to continue when we come back. We have to take a minute break, but again, we're with Todd Spencer, President and CEO of OOIDA, and Bob Poole, the Director of Transportation Policy at the Reason Foundation. And we have a question that just came in over YouTube, and then we'll get with Troy in Pennsylvania when we come back. Stay tuned.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer,
I farm, I'm a veteran,
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Mike Matousek, and this is live from Exit 24, and we're going to get right into it. We were just talking about a lot of different things, covering a lot of ground, actually. So before we keep going, we're going to go to Tom in Pennsylvania. Tom, if you can hear me, you are on the line with Todd and Bob. Go ahead.
Well, my name's not actually Tom, but it's Troy.
Oh, Troy, sorry. That's just my eyes are playing tricks on me.
It's okay. Adding on to what the one caller, had mentioned is, one of the things that I've noticed is that, areas like here in Pennsylvania or other states where you see the increase in logistic parks, and all that, there seems to be those to be growing, but yet there's little to no truck stops or areas for truckers to park to service those, logistic parks. And I've noticed this growing around the country as I've driven around, especially in the last 15 years that I've been, especially with the company I'm with. And I tell you, finding a place to park, it's very, very difficult, and especially in and around your major metropolitan areas and along major travel corridors like Interstate 81, Interstate 80, 95, 75, wherever, just depending upon the area of the country that you're in. And, and if you want to find a place to park, sometimes you got to really be starting to look at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah. No, this is really a national crisis, and it seems to be getting worse over time rather than better because trucking is growing and likely to continue to grow, and there's still no serious effort. The truck stop industry is not expanding. The state DOTs don't have the money to expand their parking just because they can't charge for it, so they it comes right out of their bottom line in terms and takes away money from the things that they need to do proper maintenance and to replace aging bridges and all these kinds of things. So it's really a problem that needs a fresh solution, and that's why in the study that I wrote for Reason Foundation, I think getting rid of the ban on commercial services at many, thousands of interstate rest areas so they can be greatly expanded to serve especially the parking needs of trucks, but also the needs of ordinary motorists who also would welcome a place to get food and drink, and when they get to a point of an electric car to be able to recharge it, and if it takes 45 minutes, go in and have lunch while the car is charging, and these sorts of things. So there really is a need to do something big on this, and it's not happening, but we might be able to get that done this year in this Congress.
Todd, anything you want to say?
Well, the points, obviously, the points that have been made, urban areas, where you have industrial areas where the need for trucks is absolutely great. these are great examples of the lack of any real long-term planning in our overall transportation network. And it's sort of, we have the highway system that we have right now because of long-term planning that took place, basically initiated by Eisenhower and then followed on through then with a national goal in mind. Since then, there's been no long-term planning at all for all of these areas that, with great need. And, we're talking about the one issue of commercializing rest areas. Okay, look, we're open for it simply because we got to have some relief, and this will provide some. Having said that, it is nowhere near what actually needs to happen. And, bear in mind, these aren't just trucks driving around. They're there because of the goods that folks absolutely have to have. And our system isn't going to move away from that in any time in the foreseeable future.
Troy, anything? I didn't mean to cut you off, Troy. I think you had a thought that you wanted to get in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up real quick because, with all what you guys are saying, and, is to bring up a bad saying is, should we consider a public-private partnership? Or is that still kind of a dangerous, bad thing to, worry about or think about, in terms of expanding or adding on to, the parking situation, the services that truckers need?
All right, Bob, is that like your cousin or brother-in-law or softball buddy? Go ahead.
And Troy, thank you for. I'm going to turn this over to Bob and to Todd. Troy, just wanted to say thank you for calling in. Those great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, the public-private partnership is exactly what I suggest in the study, because that's what the toll road turnpikes are using right now. New York Thruway has a huge program underway, financed by long-term revenue bonds, to refurbish and expand and modernize all of its many service plazas. And the model is there, the skill sets are there, investors are there waiting. There are all sorts of infrastructure investment funds that want to fund long-term revenue-generating public-private partnerships. And so revenues would be obviously a piece of the fuel sales, just like truck stops, a piece of the fuel sales, lease rentals from the various merchants that, the food operators and others that would be providing retail services, just as in airport terminals. So this is a way to mobilize the investment that would be needed to provide large, well-equipped service plazas and truck stops where that makes sense along the interstates. It's not the whole answer. I mean, in parking in metro areas where there are distribution centers and all these things is a whole separate issue, and that very much needs attention too. I don't have a ready solution for that one, but because my focus on this particular research was on the interstates. But the interstates would certainly be a big part of the solution.
Todd?
Hey, in theory, public-private partnerships make perfect sense. I note with interest the first. The initiative to move in this direction is a couple of decades old. It was the big push that came out of the George W. Bush administration, and I know it and remember it dearly because the push was on big time to toll the road I-70 that runs right in front of our office. And, we were adamantly opposed then and adamantly opposed now still, simply because the downside is, I know people can argue and you can discuss, but we're not sure that the success stories are there. The move to tolling and privatization is, while again in theory it's great, and I should point out that Macquarie, who was among the original people that did the Chicago Skyway and the Indiana Toll Road, it's my understanding that the money that Macquarie used was Australia's version of their Social Security funds. Hey, look, that makes sense. But, and I noticed, and Bob, I'll call you out on this, Bob. I noticed that in your recent comments to Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, you touted the Indiana Toll Road as one of the successes. And I think you also mentioned congestion pricing or tolled lanes in Virginia. And from the feedback that we consistently receive from truck drivers, their views from personal experience in those places is anything but positive. They don't think those routes have been improved at all. And I'm not even sure the lanes in Virginia that perhaps you were referring to, I'm not even sure trucks can even run on those lanes.
No, those are not. Trucks are not allowed on those express toll lanes on the freeways around Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. They are allowed on the similar lanes that were privately financed in Texas. The Texpress lanes in Dallas and Fort Worth do allow trucks, and I didn't know that until recently. And there's a number of others that do, but the ones in Northern Virginia do not, and the ones that are in the planning process in Maryland, the Maryland side of the Beltway around Washington D.C., which incidentally Macquarie is involved in that project as part of the preferred bidding team. Those would be cars only as well. The Indiana Toll Road, I still think it's a success, although they had, in my view, an uncalled for increase in truck toll rates about 5 years ago that I think your organization litigated to try and just lost in court, unfortunately, because I thought that was unjustified, should not have been allowed by the nature of the long-term agreement for the public-private partnership. I understand the trucker concern about that, and that should not have happened. The long-term agreement spelled out what the tolls were only supposed to be allowed to increase on an annual basis at the rate of inflation or something like that, and that was completely in excess of that. But on the other hand, the service plazas are being mostly finished refurbishing. They're adding electric vehicle charging, which is not currently of use to truckers, but it will be definitely of use to people with electric cars. And there's a lot of the pavement has been replaced on the Indiana Toll Road. So, and today it's owned by a whole consortium of public sector pension funds, which are starting to diversify their investments into long-lived revenue-generating infrastructure like toll roads and airports and things like that to try to make their pension funds fully funded, so that the retirees will actually get what they're promised when they retire.
We have about a minute and 30 seconds before we take our next break, and we had a question come in via YouTube, and the question is, we'd like to know why IFTA mileage is still counted on toll roads. We pay the toll to help keep that road maintained and still pay IFTA for toll road mileage. So I guess the question there is, should trucks or any car, I guess, for that matter, should they pay a fuel tax or a gas tax and the toll? And Bob, I'll turn it over to you. We got about a minute left, and I want Todd to get a word in as well on this.
Absolutely not. I'm long on record saying there should not be double taxation of that sort. Truck drivers, and truck drivers and motorists should get rebates on the fuel taxes that they have implicitly paid by driving on, let's say, the New York Thruway or the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And as we move forward to per mile charges, which I hope we'll eventually do, those should be replacement and not in addition to tolls or fuel taxes.
Todd, 10 seconds. I assume you agree with, I mean, I don't know what, actually. What, anything?
Well, you said one word response. I was going to use two. Hell no.
Guys, we will be right back in about 30 seconds. This is the last break. Again, we're talking with Bob Poole with the Reason Foundation and Todd Spencer with OOIDA. The number to call in is 317-676-6432. Again, that's 317-676-6432. We will be right back.
Every time you turn the key, you hope you've crossed your I's and dotted your T's. Because the last thing you want to be is non-compliant with the DOT. Fortunately, there's OOIDA. It's like spell check for truckers. Federal regulations? Check. Lease agreements and warranties? Check. Permits. Drug and alcohol testing? Check and check. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Mike Matousek, and this is live from Exit 24. And I had a script that we always seem to veer from, so I'm kind of lost as to where we're at right now. But actually have a lot of stuff to think about, and I guess since we are switching gears or talking tolling, public-private partnerships. The federal government and states are looking for ways to generate more money for roads and bridges. We all know this. Anybody that pays attention sees this. The federal diesel tax hasn't been increased in nearly 30 years. There's a number of states that have increased their gas and fuel taxes over the years. In fact, I think a majority of them. We've also seen a number of new toll roads on the interstate lanes to help fund certain projects. So, Bob, as you mentioned briefly before the break, Congress is talking about a VMT or a vehicle miles traveled tax, and a few other ideas on how to come up with more money. And I guess, Todd, the question to you is, what is OOIDA's position on tolling, P3s, and congestion pricing? And then, Bob, we'll obviously let you respond to whatever Todd says.
Whatever. Well, look, the highway system we have right now that basically has generally been the envy of the world was built on dedicated fuel taxes. And unfortunately, through the last couple of decades or more, we've moved away from specifically that system where basically we have a shortage of revenue, but going into the trust fund, but it basically was orchestrated to be that way. These are political issues, unfortunately, and again, I mentioned earlier, we have just outrageous that we have no long-term planning or long-term strategy that actually lawmakers will embrace, but we don't. They're characterized by short-term thinking. In the past, we've said, look, if tolling brings new capacity, if it brings new roads, then we're not going to oppose it, provided it brings a benefit. And of course, if you're going to do that, there needs to be some specific guidelines to make sure that users get a fair return on the money they make and they pay in. And that means making certain that the revenues that come from that are used for that particular route, not as a slush fund for other things, and that, again, users get a return on the investment when the road's paid off. Take the tolls off. These are not business entities per se. Roads are there to facilitate commerce and travel among our residents, our citizens. They are a public good, and we should always keep that in mind.
Bob, what's your perspective?
Well, I agree with about 75% at least of what Todd just said. Congress has destroyed the user pays, user benefit principle that the Interstate Highway was founded on. About 25% of all the federal highway user tax money now goes to non-highway, not only non-interstate, but non-highway purposes, mass transit, bike paths, sidewalks, everything Congress can think of to say, look what I brought you to your community. The things that should be local government spending is now subsidized by Congress out of highway user revenues. So, I mean, my vision is for the future that I lay out in my Rethinking America's Highways book is of a system that goes back fully to the user pays, user benefit principle. And Todd, you said you could be okay with tolling if it was bringing new capacity and it was dedicated solely to benefiting the people paying the tolls. Well, I want to suggest that it's not just new capacity; it's rebuilding, replacing existing capacity that's worn out. Congress a few years ago asked the Transportation Research Board of the National Academy of Sciences to look at the future of the interstate highway system. And they had an expert committee that spent 2 years working on this. A big report came out in December 2018, said the interstate is wearing out. The original pavement mostly needs to be replaced, full-depth reconstruction. There's huge numbers, as the trucking industry well knows, of obsolete interchanges that are trying to handle twice the traffic they were designed for, that need to be torn down and replaced with modern ones, like the Marquette interchange in Milwaukee was done, and the Springfield interchange in Virginia, but very few have been replaced. And many of the corridors that the trucking industry depends on don't have enough lanes, and if we're going to ever get to truck platoons and things, there's a great case for adding dedicated truck lanes as part of a rebuilt 21st century interstate system. So I think the replacement, and by the way, the committee's report estimated the cost of rebuilding and modernizing the interstate system as a minimum of $1 trillion over the next 20 years. And I cannot imagine Congress appropriating that kind of money, especially when a lot of the people in Congress think highways are a bad thing because they have motor vehicles on them that have carbon emissions. So I think if this is going to be done, it's going to have to be done by some other mechanism than Congress.
Todd, your reaction?
Well, I hope Congress can play some role. Bob, the scenario you just laid out is that if tolls can be used to rebuild sections of roads that need it, you just sort of made the case that every road is going to be a toll road. And
well, I think the whole interstate, if it needs to be rebuilt and in this way, is probably going to need to be. I mean, the trucking industry has called for improving the interstate, adding capacity, widening, and all this for 20 years, and basically nothing much has happened. You get bits and pieces done by state DOTs where they can scrape together the money, but there's no dedicated pot of money really for the interstates at the federal level anymore. It's all flexible, even though they call it by different names. But the transit industry and others have increasingly pressed to make the money flexible so they can spend it wherever they want.
Well, look, absolutely. From where we are, it would be stupid. It's stupid to oppose things like transit, oppose other ways of moving people around. I mean, it makes no sense to do that because they serve a purpose, provided they are utilized and provided that they have a funding mechanism that, from our perspective, should be other than highways.
Yes, indeed.
The kind of the curve that comes up with the user pay, user benefit system that is so commonly asserted is that, well, who really does benefit from the highways?
Right.
And we all do. Every one of us.
Sure,
even if you don't even own a car. You can't live in the middle of Timbuktu unless somebody can provide what you need, and that should have some value to you.
Absolutely, and that is primarily the trucks.
Yeah, well, we need a mechanism that takes into account those things where we're not just simply saying, okay, here's this truck and we're going to put fees on this joker till we can pay for everything.
Right.
That is not good public policy.
Well, if you watched or saw the transcript of the Environment and Public Works Committee hearing that I testified at last week, I strongly said do not try to start a conversion to mileage fees with the trucking industry because we're not anywhere near ready. We don't have the right technology. We don't have the institutions figured out. And if you try to stigmatize the trucking industry and make them the guinea pig, you're going to have a war on your hands, and you don't want to go that way because it's going to set back the whole progress of figuring out how to charge per mile over the next few decades, which we're going to need to do as vehicles become electrified and there's no more fuel to tax.
Bob, we have about 4.5 minutes left, and I think, to kind of wrap it up a little bit, and I know we guess a lot, and it's impossible to predict what Congress is going to do on this stuff, but on the funding piece, I mean, in your opinion, as of today, right, and that can change tomorrow, but if you're just guessing and sort of, everything that you know, where do you think this issue goes from here? I mean, what does Congress do when it comes to funding?
Well, first of all, you have the Biden jobs plan, which I doubt will pass in its $2.3 trillion form. I think more likely is there'll be some kind of a compromise to make it bipartisan and focus it more on traditional infrastructure. But remember, this is a batch of one-time funding spread over maybe 5, 6, 8 years, and then it's gone. But the more important thing, in a way, for the long term is the reauthorization of the Federal Highway and Transit Program, which is supposed to be done by September 30th when the fiscal year expires. And there, I think it's possible to put in some provisions, such as repealing the ban on interstate rest areas and trying to make it easier for long-term public-private partnerships to be financed in this country, because there's loads and loads of private capital that wants to invest in infrastructure, including the growing majority of our public pension systems. So I think there's some things that Congress could do to generate more revenues, even if it's politically impossible to get fuel tax increases.
Todd?
Politically impossible. Well, again, we had a system that worked really, really well and could work for a while longer, but we do need to transition in some other areas. I don't think there's nearly enough logical thinking that's gone into any of this stuff. But when push comes to shove, Congress unfortunately thinks short term. And, we're bracing ourselves here that we're going to have a major battle on our hands trying to fend off efforts to basically toll everything. And I think that's a fight worth fighting because, again, it's not been, we can agree to disagree, Bob. We don't think so far we've been well served by public-private partnerships. And
okay, I'll accept that as that's your finding, and that means the public-private partnership needs to do a better job.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. There needs to be integrity into the system before again, truck drivers don't engage in discretionary driving. Everything that they do basically is because somebody desperately wants what they're bringing.
Yes.
And we're not going to say you ain't getting it because it's going to get there one way or another. And, again, the downsides, toll roads have other effects on other traffic around. They put people on roads that basically are less safe, and they have lots and lots of side effects that can't be ignored. And, again, they need to make sense. There needs to be a value received for
Absolutely.
in exchange.
And Bob, I think and we have about a minute left, and I think where you were going with that was some of the I think you call them risk reduction measures, or pre-development agreements. But that's, I guess, for another show.
That's for another discussion. But I do think we put out the concept of value-added tolling. That tolling going forward should only be used where it adds significant value for the people who are asked to pay the tolls, which would mean trucks and cars, and that includes dedicating the revenues exclusively to the improvements and the ongoing maintenance of the facility that is created or rebuilt, and eliminating double charging, not tolls and fuel taxes on the same road at the same time, things like that. I think there's room for. I would welcome another discussion sometime on those issues. Because we've done a lot of thinking at Reason Foundation about this and trying to create a real value proposition in exchange for paying tolls.
Absolutely, Bob. Well, thank you. Really appreciate you coming on the program and for all of your insight. And again, you can go to reason.org to find all of Bob's information and the issues he covers. We hope you will. This concludes another episode of Live from Exit 24. We will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. Live from Exit 24 was brought to you by the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association and our technical crew, Barry Spillman, Nate Kelly, and Jim Fetzer. If you aren't a member yet, call our main number during business hours to join, and that number is 816-229-5791, or you can just go to our website at ooida.com.